The air was thick with tension as the heavy scent of burnt ozone lingered in the stillness. Jack stood at the edge of the canyon, the lights of his ship flickering weakly behind him. The vast alien landscape stretched endlessly in every direction, a moonless sky above and jagged stone formations below. The hum of the ship's engines was a distant whisper, drowned by the unnerving silence of the planet. The night was so deep, it seemed to swallow everything. He wasn't supposed to be here. But life had a habit of pushing him into places he never intended to go. Jack adjusted the grip on his weapon, the cool metal an odd comfort in his palm. His fingers itched, the adrenaline of the unknown pulling at him, urging him forward. His eyes scanned the horizon, dark, ominous shapes that barely registered in the periphery. The alien forest lay ahead, its grotesque, towering spires casting long shadows in the moonlight. He wasn't alone. It had been hours since the first signal, the faint transmission from the far side of the planet, a garbled mess of static and fractured speech. At first, it had seemed like another false alarm, one of many in the decades since humanity's first contact with the Hvaran. But then came the scream. The raw, guttural sound of an animal, or something far worse. He had come alone. Orders were clear. There was no room for mistakes, no room for mercy. But now, standing on the precipice, those same orders felt like the chains of a dead man. He tried not to think about the implications of what he had come here to do. It's just another mission, he told himself. In and out. Neutralize the threat. A flicker of movement caught his eye, fast, almost imperceptible. Jack spun on instinct, his weapon raised, eyes darting to where he had seen the flash. There was nothing. Just the black void of alien night. "You're not going to shoot me, are you?" The voice was low, smooth, and undeniably female. Jack's heart skipped a beat, his hand tightening around the weapon. This wasn't supposed to be happening. The aliens, these Hvaran, were formidable, yes, but they didn't speak English, not like this. Not fluently. Jack forced himself to relax, lowering the barrel of his gun. He couldn't afford to show weakness. Not now. From the shadows, a figure emerged, tall and ethereal. She was an alien, undeniably. Her skin shimmered under the faint starlight, a translucent shade of violet, her features sharp and angular. The long, silver hair that cascaded over her shoulders caught the light in strange, hypnotic ways. She moved like a predator, graceful, deliberate, as though the very air bent to her will. Her eyes were what unsettled him the most. They were dark, yet endless, black pools that seemed to absorb all light, all hope. "I can't imagine you're here for the view," she said, her voice a soothing hum, a melody that shouldn't have belonged in a place like this. Jack swallowed hard, his throat dry. "Who are you?" "I am Ilya of the Hvaran," she said, stepping closer, her gaze piercing through him like she could see every inch of his soul. "But who I am is irrelevant. What matters is what you will choose to do now." The words hung in the air, heavy with threat. She wasn't offering him a choice. The language she used was soft, but the undercurrent of menace was unmistakable. Jack's mind raced. Ilya was an alien, but she didn't move like an enemy. Her presence was like a storm in the distance, calm now, but ready to descend. "Why aren't you attacking me?" Jack demanded, struggling to control the sudden surge of fear coursing through him. It wasn't just the alien's appearance, or the violence of the unknown, it was the uncertainty. She was unpredictable, and that was what terrified him. "Because I don't have to," Ilya replied simply, as though the concept of violence was beneath her. "You will come to understand that the greatest weapon is not a blade, but your mind." She studied him, the faintest smile curling her lips. "There are many kinds of wars, human. The ones you fight with guns, and the ones you fight with trust." Her words left Jack unsettled. It was more than just a warning, it was a challenge. "Trust?" he echoed, his voice tinged with disbelief. "You expect me to trust you?" She didn't answer immediately, letting the silence stretch between them. Her eyes softened, and for a brief moment, Jack caught a glimpse of something more beneath the cold veneer of her alien form: vulnerability. It was almost impossible to imagine, Yet it was there, hidden in the depths of her gaze. I'm offering you something, Jack. Something more than your war. The mention of his name sent a shock through him. She knew who he was. Knew everything. The unease in his gut grew sharper. He'd been trained for years to handle the unknown, to face down dangers that others couldn't even imagine. But nothing had prepared him for this. The woman, no, the alien, before him was not just a threat. She was a puzzle, a door to a world Jack wasn't sure he was ready to open. The wind shifted, carrying the faintest scent of something floral but foreign, sweet but unsettling. Ilya's form blurred slightly as she stepped closer, and for a moment, it felt as though the world around them had stopped. There's a storm coming, she said, her voice barely a whisper now, as if sharing a secret. And you, Jack, you're the eye of it. Suddenly, everything shifted. Her hand brushed lightly against his wrist, and Jack felt a pulse of energy, not physical, but something deeper, something internal. It was as though she had reached inside him, touched something raw, something primal. His heart pounded in his chest. Before he could react, Ilya disappeared back into the shadows, leaving only her haunting words to echo in the emptiness. And in the silence, Jack realized that the storm had already begun. Would you like me to help with any particular sections of the chapter, or expand on the next part of the story? The night seemed to stretch on forever, an endless expanse of inky blackness that swallowed all sound, all light. Jack's boots crunched softly against the alien soil as he moved cautiously through the dense undergrowth of the Havaran forest. He could feel her presence before he saw her, like a pull in the air, a magnetic force that made every muscle in his body tense with anticipation. Ilya was watching him again. The forest around him was unlike anything he had ever encountered. Its plants towered above him, their bizarre shapes illuminated faintly by the bioluminescence pulsing in their veins. The air smelled sweet, but it carried an unsettling heaviness, like something ancient was watching from the depths. Every so often, strange noises, low, undulating growls or the rustling of something large moving just out of sight, reminded him that he was far from safe. The planet was alive in ways he hadn't even begun to understand. His eyes flicked to the shadows, but she wasn't there yet. He almost felt her, though, a presence at the edge of his consciousness that both comforted and terrified him. It wasn't supposed to be like this. She's just an alien, Jack reminded himself, gripping the hilt of his weapon tightly. This is a mission, Jack. Neutralize the threat. In and out. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that things were spiraling far beyond the scope of a simple operation. He had come to this planet to eradicate a rogue faction of the Havaran, warlike creatures who had shown no mercy to humans. But Ilya was different. There was no bloodlust in her eyes, no malice in her voice. There was something else. Something human beneath the alien exterior. He didn't know what to make of it yet. His heart skipped as her voice rang out, sharp and clear in the stillness. You're not here to kill me, Jack. Her words slipped through the air like a caress, but they held an edge. The kind of edge that could slice through flesh just as easily as it could through a man's resolve. Jack turned slowly, his eyes narrowing as he finally saw her. She was standing a few feet away, her violet skin glowing faintly in the dark. Her silver hair cascaded down her back, catching the faintest glimmer of light. The alien's eyes, as always, were endless pools, deep, black, and unblinking, staring into him like she was trying to read his very soul. You're following me, Jack said, his voice a low growl. There was no point in denying it now. Ilya tilted her head, studying him with an intensity that made Jack's skin prickle. Not following. Watching. Why? She took a step closer, her movement graceful and almost hypnotic, like liquid silver in the darkness. He could smell the strange, floral scent of her skin now, a sweet fragrance mixed with something sharp and almost metallic. His heart beat harder, but he didn't let his guard drop. He couldn't. Because you are a contradiction, Ilya answered, her voice laced with something dangerously close to amusement. You think you are here for a purpose, but you are lost, Jack. Like all humans. You think you're the ones in control. But you are not. You are the one being watched. You are the one being tested. Jack's jaw tightened. He was being tested. By her? By the Hvarin? What do you want from me? Jack asked, forcing himself to stand tall, despite the vulnerability gnawing at him. He had trained for every possible scenario, but this was beyond anything he had imagined. He didn't know if he was ready for this alien mind game. And yet, part of him was drawn to it. What do I want from you? She repeated, her lips curling into a slight smile. I want you to see. I want you to open your eyes and understand that there is more than just war, more than just blood and fire. There is something beneath that. Her words were like a puzzle, every syllable a thread Jack could almost pull together but never fully grasp. She wasn't making any sense, not in the way humans understood it. But the more she spoke, the more her presence gnawed at him. He didn't know whether it was fear or fascination, but it was there, burning beneath his skin. You want me to what? To see beyond the fight? Jack's voice was laced with frustration, but underneath that, there was a flicker of doubt. See beyond the fight? It was absurd, yet her words echoed the very thoughts that had been eating at him for years. Her eyes softened for a moment. Yes. But you must want it, Jack. You must be willing to throw aside your weapons and your walls. To trust. Trust me, or die in the cage of your own mind. Her words hit him like a blow to the chest. She wasn't talking about the mission. She wasn't talking about survival. She was talking about something deeper, something more primal. Trust? It was a dangerous word. In his world, trust was a luxury. One that had been stripped away long ago. And yet, standing there before her, Jack felt it, an unfamiliar pull in the pit of his stomach. He took a step back, his eyes scanning the alien landscape, his mind racing. His fingers twitched around the grip of his weapon again, but it felt heavier now. His mission seemed more distant, more abstract. What if I don't want to see? He whispered. Ilya's gaze never wavered. Then you will die in darkness, Jack. A death of your own making. For a long moment, the silence stretched between them, thick with meaning. Her words were not a threat, they were an invitation. Before he could respond, a low rumble shook the ground beneath them, followed by a distant, eerie screech from the depths of the forest. Something was coming. Something far worse than either of them could have imagined. Ilya's eyes flickered toward the sound, then back at Jack. You are not alone, she said softly. But you will have to decide, now, which side you are on. And with that, the shadows closed in. The distant screech tore through the dense Hvarin forest, a sound that rattled Jack's bones. Something large and menacing was approaching, a predator, perhaps, or something far worse. His hand tightened around the hilt of his weapon, instinct driving him to prepare for whatever threat was coming. But Ilya didn't move. Her expression remained unnervingly calm, as if she were waiting for something, someone. You can feel it, can't you? She said, her voice a low murmur beneath the din of the forest. She wasn't speaking to him directly, but to the air, to the land itself. Her gaze was fixed on the darkness, unblinking. The forest is alive. It senses fear. It feeds on it. Jack's pulse quickened, his senses on high alert. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up as the rumbling grew louder, closer. His military training had prepared him for countless scenarios, but nothing about this felt normal. He glanced around, but there was no movement in the shadows. The trees loomed over them like ancient sentinels, their gnarled limbs swaying in the breeze, whispering secrets Jack was not ready to hear. This isn't just a creature, Jack muttered, more to himself than to her. This is a test. Isn't it? Ilya's eyes shifted to him, that unnerving, unblinking gaze locking onto his. The weight of her stare pressed into his chest like a 1,000-pound stone. There was something almost ancient in her expression, something that went beyond intelligence, beyond life itself. You still don't understand, she whispered, her voice tinged with a strange, mournful note. You think you're the only one who's been tested. But the universe has a way of laying its trials before us all. And you're failing, Jack? You're failing, because you don't trust yourself enough to step beyond the fight. Her words hung in the air, dense and suffocating. Jack's pulse drummed in his ears. Was she talking about their mission? About him? His hands trembled for the briefest moment before he gripped his weapon tighter. The screech pierced the air again, now followed by a growl, deep and guttural. The sound was not of any creature Jack had heard before. It reverberated through the earth beneath his feet, vibrating in his chest. And then, as if the forest itself were holding its breath, the ground trembled. A massive shadow darted past them in the blink of an eye, so fast it left only a blur of motion behind. Jack's heart raced. He turned instinctively to Ilya, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and disbelief. "What was that?" he demanded, his voice tight. Ilya didn't answer immediately. She only stared into the darkened distance, her face unreadable. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, almost regretful. "The Hvaran know how to manipulate the land. This forest feeds off fear, off pain, off us. The more you resist, the stronger it gets. And the stronger it gets, the more you're bound to it." Jack felt a chill crawl up his spine as the words settled into his mind. He could feel it now, the weight of the forest, the pulsing energy that seemed to draw him in, to claim him. It wasn't just a place, it was an entity in itself, alive, breathing, watching. "I don't need to be tested," Jack muttered, his voice hard. His eyes scanned the darkness. The rumbling had stopped, but the silence that followed was worse than any sound. "I just need to complete my mission." Ilya's lips quirked into a slight smile, but there was no humor in it. Only sadness. "And what will that cost you, Jack?" she asked, her voice low, almost coaxing. "What will you lose when you keep running from what you fear most?" A low growl echoed through the trees again. This time, it was closer. Jack gritted his teeth. "I'm not afraid of you." Her eyes narrowed slightly, her gaze piercing. "No. But you are afraid of yourself." Before Jack could respond, the ground shifted beneath his feet. Something huge was moving through the underbrush, each step shaking the earth. Jack's instincts screamed at him to move, to run. His fingers brushed the weapon's trigger, but Ilya's hand shot out, grabbing his wrist with surprising force. "No," she said, her voice sharp, commanding. "You'll never survive if you keep hiding behind your weapon. You need to face it." Her words cut through him like a blade. He felt exposed, vulnerable. But he was a soldier, trained to fight, to survive. He didn't need to understand her cryptic words. He just needed to survive. The shadow moved again, this time breaking through the thick foliage, revealing itself in a blur of motion. It was massive, much larger than any creature he'd ever seen, and it moved like lightning, a streak of darkness that made the trees seem like mere sticks in comparison. Ilya's hand fell away from Jack's wrist, her eyes now glowing softly, their black depths brimming with a strange, almost unearthly power. "It's time," she said, her voice a mere breath against the chaos unfolding. And then, as if the forest itself had grown impatient with their hesitation, the massive creature leaped into view. It was a nightmare of writhing limbs, sharp, jagged teeth, and claws that looked like they could tear a man in half with a single swipe. The ground quaked beneath its weight as it landed, sending a shockwave through the earth that nearly knocked Jack off his feet. He took a step back, instinctively raising his weapon. But Ilya was already in front of him, standing between him and the creature. She lifted a hand, and the creature stopped, its glowing eyes locking onto her, almost waiting. The air crackled with tension, and Jack's breath hitched. "Don't fight it," Ilya said softly. "It will consume you, just like everything else." The words hung in the air as the creature growled low, its eyes burning with hunger. Jack was frozen, caught between instinct and something far more dangerous, trust. He glanced at Ilya, her form illuminated in the eerie glow of the creature, and for the first time, he wondered if the true test had just begun. But he still wasn't sure if he was ready. The tension in the air was almost suffocating. The creature loomed before them, its jagged claws twitching with unrestrained hunger, its deep, glowing eyes never once leaving Ilya. Jack's pulse thudded in his throat as he stared at the beast, the hairs on the back of his neck prickling. It was far larger than anything he'd ever encountered, its movements fluid and predatory. But it was Ilya's presence that kept it at bay, her every breath resonating with an unnatural power that Jack could feel in the marrow of his bones. Ilya didn't move. She stood like a statue, her chest rising and falling slowly, her eyes fixed on the creature's glowing form. Jack's eyes darted from her to the monster and back again. The tension between them, human and alien, predator and prey, seemed to stretch the very fabric of the air. The creature's growl rumbled deep in its throat, vibrating the earth beneath Jack's feet. It took a step forward, and Jack's fingers itched toward his weapon. He was a soldier, trained for battle. Fight, survive, and finish the mission. It was simple. Yet nothing about this situation felt simple. He wasn't sure what kind of enemy he was up against anymore. Ilya! Jack's voice trembled despite himself. He didn't know what he was asking for. Permission? Answers? Protection? His mind was too scrambled to form coherent thoughts. But Ilya didn't look at him. Her eyes were fixed on the beast, her expression unreadable. You think you know fear, Jack? She said softly, so quietly that Jack almost didn't hear it over the creature's growl. But you've never faced this kind of test. Not yet. And this? She glanced down at her hand, glowing faintly. This is just the beginning. The creature took another step forward. Its claws scraped the earth, a sound like metal on stone, sending a wave of icy dread through Jack's veins. It was massive, easily 10 times his size, and it was still moving toward them, its hunger palpable. But still, Ilya stood unmoving, her eyes still locked onto its. Jack's heart pounded, his instincts screaming at him to act, but he couldn't. Why won't you move? Jack's voice cracked under the weight of his uncertainty. Why aren't you afraid? Ilya finally tore her gaze away from the beast and met Jack's eyes, her face almost serene in the chaos that surrounded them. Because fear isn't what's keeping us alive. Belief is. The creature snarled, snapping its jaws, but Ilya's steady gaze remained unshaken. Jack's confusion deepened. What was she talking about? What belief? And why was he standing here, weapon in hand, frozen? Everything here is alive, Jack, she continued, her voice low but firm. The forest, the creatures, the very ground beneath us. All of it is connected. And when you start to believe that, really believe it, the tests change. You won't just face them, you'll become them. Jack was dizzy with the weight of her words. What did she mean by that? She wasn't just talking about survival, not really. She was talking about something deeper, something primal. But Jack didn't have time to process it. The creature lunged again, its eyes burning with a fierce intensity. Jack moved on instinct. Without thinking, he raised his weapon and aimed at the creature, preparing to fire. But before he could pull the trigger, Ilya stepped in front of him. Stop, she commanded, her voice like ice and fire all at once. Jack faltered, his heart racing as he lowered his weapon. His hands were shaking. What are you doing? He spat. We don't have time for this. We need to fight. Not yet, Ilya whispered. Her voice dropped to a near inaudible murmur, a chant. She extended her hand toward the creature, and Jack could feel the air around them tremble with power. It wasn't magic. It wasn't technology. It was something else, something beyond his understanding. The creature hesitated, its glowing eyes flickering. The beast took another step forward but stopped as if caught in a spell. Ilya's eyes remained closed, her lips moving in a rhythm that seemed to echo through the earth. The glow around her hand intensified, a pulse of energy that stretched out from her fingertips and washed over the creature like a wave. It stopped. For a long moment, there was nothing but the hum of energy, the crackling silence. The creature growled once more, but its posture had changed. It was no longer attacking, no longer hungry. It was waiting. For something. Jack stared, wide-eyed, at Ilya. His mouth was dry. What did you do? He whispered, his voice thick with disbelief. I didn't do anything, she replied softly, her eyes still closed. It did this. It heard me, Jack. And now, it knows you! Jack swallowed hard. This was no ordinary creature. It was intelligent. It was alive in ways he couldn't begin to comprehend. And it was responding to her, responding to them. He stepped forward, his weapon forgotten, and called out to the creature, his voice raw. What do you want from us? The creature's glowing eyes flickered again, and for the briefest moment, Jack swore he saw something like understanding in them. But just as quickly the moment passed. The creature's eyes turned back to Ilya, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. A low rumble echoed through the trees. This time, it wasn't just the creature. The whole forest seemed to be alive with movement. Jack's pulse surged, his body tensing in preparation for the fight he knew was coming. But Ilya's eyes snapped open, her expression shifting to something unreadable. The test is here, Jack. And this time, you can't hide behind your weapon. Jack's stomach dropped. He could feel it, the weight of the decision ahead. Ilya had been preparing him for this, but he hadn't been ready. Not yet. The creature growled once more, but this time, there was no anger in it. Only curiosity. And Jack had no choice but to face it.